The meeting will please come to order. Albany City Council, Monday, March 3rd. Pledge of Allegiance. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Roll call.
Here.
Councilmember Barnes?
Here.
Councilmember Moss?
Here.
Vice Mayor Weil?
Here.
Mayor Thompson?
Here. Next item.
Report on action taken in closed session.
The council met in closed session for the purpose of conference with legal counsel to discuss existing litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D1, Cody et al. Versus City of Albany et al., United States District Court Case Number C13-05270. Next item, please.
Consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or a member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar.
Is there any item the council or staff would like to have
4-6, 4-8.
for 6?
And Madam Mayor, staff would like to pull 4-7 and postpone it for a later date.
Okay, so we will pull 4-7 and we will,
Okay, I take that back. We're moving forward with 4-7. Yes.
we're moving forward with 4-7? So you don't want to, well, I'm going to pull that one anyway. Okay, so 4-6, 4-7, 4-8. Is there any item a member of the audience would like to have pulled other than that one, those three? Okay, we'll start with 4-6.
4-6 is the contract renewal for Albany, Animal Control Services with Berkeley. And I was just noticing that they have some costs for employees, and some of them seem kind of high. Do we review what they are actually charging and then compare it to what is the going rate, for example?
Yes, the overall cost of $66,000 is less than anything we could do either on our own or contracting with another city or doing it partially on our own and just using their shelter. So through the full analysis, even though it might seem high that one item for staff is a little high, the total cost of $66,000 is less than we could get elsewhere.
So it's like an average almost that comes out better for us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you want me to, I'll wait on 4-8 then.
4-7, I would like to pull this because I would like to abstain from voting on this one. And 4-8.
4-8 is a request to Alameda County Transportation Commission for carryover funds, and I was noticing that there's a huge number or an amount of carryover funds, and do you think there's going to be any problem for them to okay us using those funds? I mean, they will they give them back or maintain that we can keep them?
Sure. Good evening, Council. This is Ray Chan, Public Works Director. The reason we request for the extension actually for carrying over in this case is to make good use of every single dollar we receive from ACTC. Previously, the city practice has been we spend some of the money on operations and the majority of money on putting on the street. Since I got hired by the city, one of my goals is to put every single dollar on the street, meaning every single dollar will be used for paving the street or making the street safer for our residents. So in this case, what we are requesting for the Alameda County is to let us use the full funding and then use it for paving or use it for the transportation safety purposes. So
there's no there's no way that we're going to lose the money.
Absolutely,
okay.
Yeah. With the letter that the mayor is going to send it to the Alameda County, actually we are keeping every single dollar for City of Albany.
Okay. So it's not like we didn't know about the money, it's just things were sort of piling up to make sure we had money for some of the things we needed to do. Is that what it sounds like?
That's correct. We are fully aware of how we are going to use the money, and we have good plans of using the money. In fact, 1 month ago, on February 3rd, the council approved to use a BKF to help the city to kind of modify the process that we have been using on the street paving treatment, so that by doing that, we're using a better technology so that we can stretch the dollar, we can cover more street and better use of the funding.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Okay. The Chair will entertain a motion regarding the consent calendar, and I would ask that you do it with the exception of 4-7.
I so move.
Second.
It has been moved by Vice Mayor Weil, seconded by Councilmember Atkinson, that we approve the consent calendar with the exception of 4-7. Would you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson?
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Weil?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Aye, and the motion carries. It is unanimous. Now, the Chair will entertain a motion regarding 4-7.
I would move to pass ordinance number 2014-03, amendment to the Planning and Zoning chapter of the Municipal Code to allow digital billboards in the commercial mixed-use zoning district.
Second.
It has been moved by Councilmember Moss, seconded by Councilmember Atkinson, that we approve ordinance number 2014-03, amendments to Planning and Zoning chapter of the Municipal Code to allow digital billboards in the commercial mixed-use zoning district. Would you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson?
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Weil?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Abstain. The motion carries, and Thompson is an abstention. Next item, please.
Presentation, proclamation in honor of American Red Cross Month.
Okay. Do we have representatives here from Red Cross? I'll meet you over here. Always happy to support the Red Cross. So, proclamation in honor of the American Red Cross Month. Whereas March is American Red Cross Month, a special time to recognize and thank our everyday heroes, those who reach out to help their neighbors when they are in need. And whereas American Red Cross heroes are on the front lines every day, they volunteer their time, give blood, take life-saving courses, or provide financial donations to help those in need. And whereas the City of Albany would like to remember our heroes who assist people in need, working tirelessly to help in times of disaster when someone needs life-saving blood or the comfort of a helping hand. And whereas across the country and around the world, the American Red Cross responded to hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and wildfires, the tragedy at the Boston Marathon, and the Typhoon Haiyan in Philippines. And whereas in the past year, the 3,000 local volunteers of the American Red Cross Bay Area chapter helped more than 730 families with temporary housing, clothing, food, and emotional support during 433 local disasters. Our local chapter trained more than 177,000 people in life-saving, CPR, first aid, water safety, and preparedness education. Local chapter provided emergency communications, counseling, financial assistance, and a caring present to more than 8,000 local military families. And our local chapter supported 28 Bay Area hospitals, providing them with nearly 75,000 units of red blood cells, platelets, and plasmas to patients in need. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that the Albany City Council hereby proclaims March 2014 as American Red Cross Month and encourages all Americans to support this organization and its noble humanitarian mission. And thank you so much. Do you want to say? Yeah.
I'll just introduce myself and my colleague. I'm Cortese Saunders, and I'm on the Alameda County Leadership Council. And my colleague here is Madeline Biscatui, who is part of our Community Partners Services with the American Red Cross. And it's really an honor to come here. We were here last year together as partners, and we're here this year again. March is Red Cross Month, and I wanted to just share just a little update more about what we are doing here locally, even specifically in the city of Albany. But I also wanted to share first, though, that we have there's about 360 actually very close local volunteers that are part of the disaster preparedness and part of preparations for helping people plan and families plan for disasters. And I say locally because I'm talking about within Alameda County, but also West Contra Costa County, because we're very close, and oftentimes when there is a situation, it might be a volunteer from El Cerrito. So with that, though, there's been about 134 incidences that are primarily fires, but also it's situations where the police department, fire department, or the EOC will call Red Cross out. So those volunteers are people that are right here in the community. But even more recently, I got a call from Madeline today. We are working right now with the fire department here, the chief and one of his lieutenants, and that is the city of Albany is looking at, and I should say actually they're reviewing their emergency preparedness and also have Red Cross in terms of just looking at shelters. Madeline is also involved with St. Albans, who has been one of our shelter partners, and we're looking at ways that we can even strengthen that. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you to the city of Albany, letting you know that we are here. And we appreciate the volunteers that are here. We appreciate the support that we get here. I left my Samson back there on the chair, but I was going to say we do have a Red Cross application for preparedness now, and not hurricanes here, but actually you could get it for tornadoes, but primarily for earthquakes. So that is something new to us. And we also just want to remind the City Council that we will send you in about a couple of months, just a reminder that we do have a Heroes event in September where the Red Cross recognizes everyday local heroes. These are just people like you and I that help others out. So I know Channel 2 advertises it for us, but we also just send out a nomination so that you can nominate a citizen in the City of Albany. So with that, we'd like to just thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next item, please.
Go to the city public forum announcements for person desiring to address the city council on an agenda that's not on an item that's not on the agenda. Please note that city policy limits each speaker up to 3 minutes. The mayor may reduce the time limit per speaker depending on the number of speakers. The Brown Act limits the council's ability to take and/or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items are normally referred to staff for comments or to a future agenda. All persons wishing to speak on an item on the agenda are to fill out a speaker card and provide it to the clerk. Comments related to items appearing on the agenda are taken up at the time the city council deliberates each action item. The mayor will announce when the period for public comment is open on each agenda item. Please note that city policy limits each speaker up to 3 minutes. The mayor may reduce the time limit per speaker depending on the number of speakers. So
Is
the
there
speaker cards
anyone
are in
who
the
would
back.
like to speak on an item not on the agenda?
Good evening. Mayor Thompson, members of the commission, I'm Doug Donaldson. I live on Spokane. Did you know that Albany is the 12th most exciting suburb in the United States? This is a survey done by something called Movoto Real Estate. They've looked at over 100 and some communities, suburbs, small cities around the country, a whole variety of criteria. Cambridge, Massachusetts is number 1. Berkeley is number 3. Albany is number 12. And others are Quincy, Massachusetts, Miami Beach, Florida, Santa Monica, Lakewood, Ohio, Jacksonville Beach, Florida, Tempe, Arizona, and Evanston, Illinois was 10th. So I thought it was kind of interesting, an interesting survey. The criteria that they used are kind of unique, I guess, but it includes active life options, fast food restaurants per capita, the lower the better. Fast food restaurants as a percentage of the whole restaurant availability, the lower the better. Nightlife per capita, live music venues in the community, those kinds of things. So anyway, I thought it was an interesting thing. I just ran into it. Actually, I found a link on the American Planning Association newsletter that came out, and I thought I'd look at it for Berkeley, and looked at the whole thing, and lo and behold, there's Albany at number 12. So I thought I would share that with you, and I thought
Thank
it was
you
kind of
very
fun.
much.
Yeah, yeah. We can claim to fame.
There you go.
Sure, you can. And I'll do that. Let me finish the speaker card, and I'll give it to you. Okay. If you want pass that around if you want. There. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Carol O'Keefe, Albany resident. Yet another reason that Albany is the 12th most exciting suburb and would be even higher ranking if we did more of these is the Friends of the Albany Library book sales. The next one is Saturday, March 15th. It starts at 10, it goes until 4. After much debate, we decided we didn't want to get wet, so it's inside only in the Edith Stone Room. Hope you all can come. And by the way, if you have any books or materials to donate, please don't.
Oh.
Our storage space is exploding. Just hold on to them for another 3 or 4 weeks, please, until we can make some room. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Francesco Papalia. I was told by the city clerk that emails that would be sent to the council regarding agenda items would be in a binder at the back of the meeting. Is that the case? Was I properly informed, or did I miss them? I was looking for them. There's a big binder, but I don't know. So did you see them? Okay, maybe I just missed it. But that's correct, right? That all emails are then placed in that great big binder there?
No, there's a smaller.
Oh, okay, it wasn't there when I think it just showed up.
Is there anyone else who would like to address the council on an item not on the agenda?
Amber Whitson, Albany resident. At the meeting where you unanimously approved the renewal of Berkeley Food and Housing Project's contract, citizens from all sides of the many complicated issues surrounding those experiencing homelessness on Albany's waterfront and elsewhere in town called for some system of accountability for tracking the progress of BFHP. I saw Carmen the day that she came out to the landfill against the wishes of her supervisor, as she told me, to do intakes with Vinny and Elisa, who are here tonight, and she is 7.5 months pregnant. I should also mention that they're clean and sober. Carmen reduced her to tears on Saturday. Carmen told me that day that Berkeley Food and Housing Project had just hired someone to work in Albany. That was February 19th. I know quite a few people who have been flaked on and not been able to reach Berkeley Food and Housing Project just in the past week, let alone since February 19th. I'm still hearing detailed stories of Berkeley Food and Housing Project flaking on and letting down Bulb residents who tried desperately to reach out to them for assistance. Where is the accountability? When will I stop hearing people say sentences that include, well, if the city of Albany cared? There is right now a couple out on the Bulb who has found an apartment in Albany that they can afford, and they can't reach Berkeley Food and Housing Project. Still, if we could get some system of actual accountability, there is well over 20 that I know of offhand, people living out on the Bulb. Quite a few of them now have incomes, and they cannot get assistance from Berkeley Food and Housing Project. It's not a good place to spend your money when they're reducing very pregnant girls to tears. They told them they had a place that they could stay at, up on Dillon's Way, off the Arlington. Carmen said that it's too far, that she would have to walk uphill with the baby, and that there's one bus that goes there only once a day. The number 7 runs every 40 minutes, and it takes them less than 4 minutes walk from there. But she had her in tears, telling her, oh, you guys can't stay there. It's not a good place to spend your money if you're spending it on people that aren't doing the job you're paying them to do. So if we could get an actual system of accountability, then I would stop asking for one. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the council on an item not on the agenda? I would also like to commend the volunteers who worked on the Film Fest. It was exceedingly successful. Some people worked for the whole time, and they did a great job, so we want to commend them for that. We also want to commend the officers who were given awards by Mothers Against Drunk Driving. There were 4 officers who were honored. Next item, please.
Public hearing, resolution number 2014-18, adopting the initial study mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring and reporting program for the 2007 to 2014 housing element, and resolution number 2014-19, amending the Albany General Plan by adopting the 2007 to 2014 housing element. Staff recommendation that the council adopt resolution 2014-18, adopting the initial study mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring and reporting program for the 2007 to 2014 housing element, and resolution 2014-19, amending the Albany General Plan by adopting the 2007 to 2014 housing element.
Staff, please.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. The action before you this evening is to consider 2 resolutions, which, if approved, will be the council's final action to update the housing element of the city's general plan. The first resolution adopts the environmental documents for the plan, which include an initial study, mitigated negative declaration, and the mitigation monitoring program. These are all required by the California Environmental Quality Act. The second resolution would replace the 1992 housing element with the 2007 through 2014 housing element, the draft which is a part of the agenda packet. The Planning and Zoning Commission has reviewed these documents at a recent meeting and recommend approval. I'll turn the report over to Barry Miller, our consultant, in just a moment, but I wanted to explain that you do have before you, sorry, Barry, a supplemental staff report that we provided to you this evening at 7:30 in response to several pieces of communication that have come in, and we felt it would be important to have that information in the record. The first item is that the city received correspondence today from the Public Interest Law Project addressing some concerns they have regarding the adequacy of the city's housing development sites. City staff, consultants, and the city attorney have been carefully reviewing this concern, and we believe that the record is clear that the city's zoning standards could have accommodated additional housing projects had applications been received. The correspondence from the Public Interest Law Project also indicates a concern that rents at UC Village do not meet the affordable, moderate income affordability standards. So attached to your supplemental report is a summary table that compare current UC Village rents with current qualifying income thresholds. The second item that has come up is that following the completion of the environmental review document and past the closure date of the comment period, the city's CEQA consultant received an email from the school district regarding the need for additional school facilities as student enrollment increases. Because the housing element does not contain policies that change zoning on properties or increase the allowable densities in zoning districts, we believe the adoption of the housing element in itself does not result in the generation of additional children who enroll in the district schools. And in the future, as actual development does occur, the school district will receive development fees as allowed by state law, which will address those potential impacts. In order to ensure a full record for the preparation of the CEQA document and the housing element, we've revised Resolution 2418 to better reflect this correspondence and to also clarify some of the findings, and there were some typographical errors and so forth. So we're recommending to you this evening the approval of the revised resolution number 2014-18. As I mentioned, copies were provided to you this evening. There are also copies back in the back of the room and in the binder and so forth. At this point, now I'll turn it over to Barry to give you a review of the housing element.
And we have a brief PowerPoint presentation this evening. I don't know if I'm bringing it up or... I'll get started. Good evening, Mayor and members of the Council. I'm Barry Miller. I'm the Consulting Project Manager of the Albany General Plan Update, which includes the housing element. Tonight I have a short presentation that reviews the status of the housing element and the resolutions with which Jeff has just described. To recap, the housing element is one of the 7 mandatory elements of the Albany General Plan. Every city and county in California is required to have a housing element expressing its policies for housing, conservation, and production. This is a unique part of the general plan for several reasons. First, it's the only element of the general plan that is subject to certification by a state agency. The protocol is for cities and counties to submit their housing elements to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for a compliance determination. Second, it's the only element that is subject to a regional fair share requirement. Through its housing element programs, the city must show that it's doing its fair share to meet the housing needs of the surrounding region. Third, it's the only element that has to be updated according to a fixed schedule. Since 1981, the state has required cities to update their housing elements roughly every 7 to 8 years. We're now in what's called the 4th cycle of housing elements, which cover the period 2007 to the end of 2014. Prior to that, we were in the 1999 to 2006 cycle. Next year, we'll be at the beginning of the 5th cycle, which runs through January 2023, roughly 8 years. The contents of the housing element you can see on the slide behind me. Every element must have these 5 basic components. First, it must include an evaluation of the previous housing element, which in this case is the 1992 Albany housing element within the general plan. Second, there's a needs assessment that looks at census data, market trends, and housing conditions to evaluate Albany's housing needs. Third, we have an evaluation of potential housing sites, particularly sites that are capable of supporting higher density housing and housing that could potentially be affordable to lower income households. Next, there's a constraints analysis, which looks at possible obstacles to building housing in the city, such as zoning regulations, parking standards, permitting procedures, and fees. Finally, there's a set of goals, policies, and actions. The actions provide specific direction to the city on the steps to take following adoption. Tonight is the culmination of a 6-year process. In 2007, there were a number of City Council and Planning and Zoning Commission meetings to discuss the regional housing needs allocation. In 2008, there were additional study sessions, and a draft element was assembled for review by the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. This continued into 2009 with a community workshop held to look at potential housing sites. In 2009, a working draft was submitted to the state for their review. They provided comments that fall, and there were additional study sessions to consider revisions. After a delay triggered by reductions in staff and the departure of key staff working on the project, work resumed in 2013 as part of the general plan update. We had 4 study sessions with the Planning and Zoning Commission between May and October, and a town meeting on housing on October 1st. A revised version was submitted to the state on October 25th, and comments were received 2 months later. We responded to those comments and had another session with the Planning and Zoning Commission in January and circulated the required CEQA documents at that time. On February 12th, the Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing. At that time, they approved 2 resolutions, one recommending your approval of the initial study mitigated negative declaration, and the other recommending approval of the housing element. As I mentioned in the earlier slide, the housing element has to demonstrate that Albany is providing for its fair share of the region's housing need. This is defined through a process called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. ABAG prepares the RHNA assignments for each city and county in the Bay Area, taking into consideration the size of the community, its employment growth, its proximity to transit, and its ability to accommodate future growth. Once that amount is determined, it's broken down into 4 income categories. Cities are not required to build the housing units in their RHNA, but they must show that they have sufficient land zoned to accommodate this growth. For the current planning period, as you can see on the slide, our RHNA is 276 units. That includes 117 above moderate income units and 52 moderate income units. The demand for these is typically met by the private development market. The totals also include 43 low and 64 very low income units. It's difficult for the private market to provide these units at affordable rent, so these are most often produced by nonprofits or service providers. Since we're already 6 years into the planning period, we can adjust these numbers for units that have already been built, but that still leaves a remaining need for 101 low and very low income units. So the housing element focuses on where these units might be constructed given current zoning and land use in the city. Chapter 4 of the housing element identifies 17 sites with the capacity for 170 units. These sites are already zoned to allow multifamily densities, and their existing uses suggest that they're viable candidates for future housing, and Chapter 4 goes into detail on each site. Quickly, the heart of the housing element are a series of goals, policies, and actions. There are 5 goals. 4 of these are carried forward from the 92 element, and 1 is new. The first deals with the conservation of existing housing in Albany. The second deals with the production of new housing, including market rate housing as well as affordable housing. The third goal looks specifically at special needs groups, including seniors, persons with disabilities, the homeless, large families, and single parents. The fourth goal, which is the new goal since 1992, looks at the removal of housing constraints. The final goal looks at equal access to housing, including the enforcement of state and federal fair housing laws. Under each of these goals, there are policies and actions in the document. These include a combination of measures that we've carried forward from 1992, measures that we needed to add to comply with state law over the last 20 years, measures that respond to the analysis that was done to prepare the document, and many ideas from the community and from the Planning and Zoning Commission. Some of the key actions to be implemented following adoption are highlighted in this slide. I mentioned zoning changes earlier. There are a number of specific code revisions that would be made before the end of the planning period. These include adoption of minimum density standards of 20 units per acre for residential development in the Solano commercial and San Pablo commercial zones, clarification of the parking requirements for second units, allowing second units in the R2 zoning district, eliminating the use permit requirement for multifamily in R4, which is the residential towers zone, allowing residential uses on the ground floor for projects in the San Pablo commercial zone with a use permit if those projects include at least 50% affordable units, and that's outside of the Solano commercial node only. There are also actions relating to public information and outreach to residents, to property owners, and to developers. There's a fee reduction policy for affordable housing. There's an action to look more closely at the contribution of second units to our affordable housing stock, including a survey of second unit rents, an action to create an affordable housing fund, which would become a repository for fees under the city's inclusionary zoning program. There's an action to formalize lot consolidation procedures and other actions which are ongoing programs and operating procedures. Adoption of a new housing element constitutes an amendment to the Albany General Plan. As such, it's considered a project under the California Environmental Quality Act, and it is subject to an initial study requirement. Now, there are no land use or zoning map changes proposed by the element, so the impacts are primarily associated with creating incentives for housing on commercial land. Again, there are no specific developments or projects proposed by the housing element either, so the CEQA analysis is really more theoretical about building more housing versus commercial in the future. The initial study identified 2 potentially significant impacts, one on air quality, the other on hydrology, and we have identified mitigation measures which would be implemented as conditions of approval when development is proposed in the future. These would not need to be implemented right away because they'd be linked to future development projects. Before I wrap up, I just wanted to go through the attachments for this evening's staff report. There are many of them, and to put this into context, we thought it would be helpful to quickly walk through what those are. First, we have 2 resolutions. Jeff mentioned those, the initial study resolution and the housing element resolution. Second, we have a copy of the housing element itself. That's attachment 3, actually. This is the January 2014 version, and that includes responses to the HCD comments in red line and strikeout format. Next, we have copies of the 2 resolutions passed by the Planning and Zoning Commission last month, and these recommend council action on both of these documents. We've also provided a copy of the HCD comment letter that was received in December. We have an annotated list of the edits that were made to the draft that was submitted to them in October. As I've mentioned earlier, those have been inserted into the January draft that you have in your packets. Next, we provided you with copies of letters from the public. Some of these were provided to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Some were sent to the State Housing and Community Development Department to assist them in their review. Moving on, we have some supplemental changes that have been made since January 31st. These include edits to reflect council actions in January, such as allowing emergency shelter in the SPC zone without a use permit, and some final edits in response to comments from HCD. HCD has looked over this addendum, and we believe that with these changes, the city will receive certification. There's also an attachment to the staff report that addresses the issue of site availability between 1999 and 2006. Jeff mentioned that issue. This is in response to a recurring comment that the city has an obligation to carry forward the units that were not built in the last planning period because it didn't have a certified element. This issue is also raised in some supplemental correspondence you've received tonight. We've used 2 different approaches to demonstrate that the city did have adequate sites during that time period. In Chapter 2 of the housing element, we've demonstrated that most of the sites that we've identified in this element were also zoned and available for housing construction during the prior period. We've also looked at sites that were listed in the 1992 element, and there are at least 130 units of capacity that were identified on those sites that still existed during that time period. The last attachment is the initial study and mitigated negative declaration. So for tonight's item, we're recommending that you take public comment on the draft element and consider these comments. We've provided 2 resolutions, which Jeff has mentioned. If the council approves these resolutions, we will flow the additional edits that are in your packet into the document and submit the housing element to the state immediately, and they will have 90 days to issue a compliance letter to the city. We hope to get confirmation from them sooner than that because we have been working with them closely over the last 4 or 5 months as they've reviewed these various drafts. As I mentioned earlier, we're continuing to work on other parts of the general plan, and we will begin work on the next cycle housing element pretty much right after we get the letter from the state. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any council member have a question for staff or consultant?
I just have a quick one. You mentioned in your supplemental report today that the school district weighed in fairly late in this process. Was that the extent of the communication with the school district? Had they been involved in the process earlier in any way?
For the preparation of the environmental review document, what happened specifically is the consultant reached out to the district early on in the preparation of the document as they normally should, to other agencies that might be affected, and that was the response that the consultant received was to that inquiry for information to prepare the document. They have, I've met with the superintendent from time to time and briefed her on the big picture that we're updating the general plan, the projections that ABAG has for us, both in the affordable housing and overall longer-term development patterns. But those have been more informal meetings.
I have a few questions. First, revisions to the zoning ordinance, including eliminating the use permit requirement for multifamily units in the R4 residential tower zone.
Yes. In our zoning ordinance, it's kind of a peculiar requirement that for our R4, which is a high-density zoning district where we want to have higher-density housing, the ordinance requires a use permit. So it's it's an extra step in the process that we don't have an explanation for. It serves as a relatively minor, but nonetheless a constraint to a potential application for a project if not only do they have to go through design review, but they have to get this use permit as well. So we're recommending that use permit be required and they simply follow the requirements of the zoning ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Conducting a survey of second units in Albany, including rents, how will that happen?
Everything from Craigslist type of surveys or other online research to reaching out to individual property owners. We do know of the people who, obviously our files maintain who has received permits for a second unit, and we'll reach out to them and see if they're willing to share with us what they're charging in rents.
Okay, and then you mentioned this, I'm just wondering if we get extra credit, 170 lower income units when only 101 are required.
They don't offer extra credit in this process.
Do we get extra credit? Okay, those are my questions. Oh, you have a
So
question?
on the second units, there are units that aren't permitted.
Right.
How do you handle those, and can we use those? How would they maybe go about getting a permit if somebody wanted to, be legal?
Well, I think a big constraint to many of the units that are not yet permitted by the city are the city's parking regulations. And the council's established a working group to look at our residential parking standards. And one of the things that may come out of that working group would be some revisions, which would, to parking standards for second units, which then would kind of change the requirements substantially for many of these units. And so it may become relatively easy for people to legalize their units. And that's what we would be recommending to you ultimately, that will bring back to you a program to try to incentivize some of those second units, including parking.
It also occurs to me that if you have a unit, you have to have a parking spot for that unit, and yet there's a lot of families that have 4 and 5 cars. Sometimes it doesn't seem quite balanced in terms of some of it. I don't know whether they're looking at anything like that, but I certainly don't suppose we could tell people they can only have a certain number of cars. But anyway, this just seems like that happens a lot too. My last question is about R4. We don't have a lot of R4 right now, but do we anticipate any others besides the kind of along the commercial areas right now?
No, the R4 district right now is basically the high-rises on Pierce Street.
Right.
So we're not proposing any changes to expand that R4 zoning district anywhere.
So then how does that relate to the use permit? Is it just in case?
It's in case someone were to apply to build a higher density.
Maybe not even there, but someplace else even.
I believe that's the only place we have R4 right now. I'm trying to visualize the map in my head.
For the next housing element, which would be in another year starting, are we looking at any higher than 3 stories? Because we sort of have a limit right now.
Right. Well, we haven't really gotten into that. I don't want to speculate about that, but I don't anticipate any major zoning requirements. We do the requirements that we have to plan for are going to be a little bit higher. I think it's 330 or 40
334
instead of 270 something. So we do have to find some more locations for housing, but we think we can work through that.
Okay.
But you and the Planning and Zoning Commission will have plenty of opportunities to take a look at that before.
All right, great, thanks.
I do have one more question. Under financial impact, it says the element also states that the city will apply for or assist applicants in applying for available grants and other funding sources which could benefit low and very low income households. My question is, how will that work with the city applying for a developer?
Right. There may be projects that come along at locations where, say, a sewer line down the street is under capacity. And so as part of the project, it's a piece of public infrastructure. If we if we don't have the resources to do that, that falls on the developer to do. If it's an affordable housing project, that can often kind of have a chilling effect on the developer's interest in developing the project. So there are grant funds out there to help incentivize the development of affordable housing, and in some cases, they're specifically for public infrastructure related to a project. So, theoretically, there may be a situation where we apply for a grant to fix up a sewer line or a storm drain or something like that. That helps the developer, the affordable housing developer, put their money and their resources into making the project more affordable.
Thank you. Okay, we will open the public hearing. If you would like to speak on the issue, would you please get a card and then come to the side of the room and then to the podium.
We have Peggy McQuaid and Amber Woods.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I'm Peggy McQuaid, Albany resident. In all the research I've done on housing, there's one constant thread. Every discussion starts with the phrase, our housing manager or our housing department. Albany doesn't have either of these. This should not be considered as a constraint to the housing element, but rather as a need to be filled before beginning to consider the next one. As you begin to review the budget in the coming months, I encourage you to seriously consider how you might sufficiently increase staffing levels to enable the implementation of the housing element. There are a variety of creative ways to do this, and I know that you can find the best solution for Albany. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you adopt this housing element, you will do so flying in the face of Government Code 65584.09. Having never submitted a housing element for the 1999 through 2006 planning period, yet still having been assigned a RENA by the Association of Bay Area Governments for that planning period, the housing element currently before you does not take into account the carryover from previous planning periods, and therefore should not be adopted until the requirements from Government Code 65584.09 are met. Thank you.
Thank you.
Francesco Papalia, Albany resident and local realtor. Within the last year, I have received multiple inquiries from people who were looking at houses to buy or to sell, but most of the people who buy who wanted to know about what would happen if we rented that illegal unit. It's very common that it occurs out there in the marketplace. I recently answered one of those questions with, they asked me, how can I make it legal? And I said, it's usually a problem with parking, and you wouldn't be able to overcome that unless there's a change in the parking ordinance. And I sent that out recently in an email. I think there is a way for you to provide relief from that requirement for parking along with the stipulation that there is a limited number of registered vehicles registered at the property. There is a shift going on right now where there are a lot of people who don't have two cars, couples, that are using of the transit system as their main way of doing things, or using something like a city car. And I believe it's a perfectly feasible option to be able to provide that kind of relief for legalization of secondary units by having, as part of the permit process, that you prove that you will continually limit the number of cars that are registered at the property. There are some places where I live on Key Route Boulevard where the street parking is not an issue. But if you just go one block over to Pomona, you will find a lot of competition for space. And on other streets like Kane's, where there's apartments, there's a lot of competition for space. So you do have to consider that that could be a problem if you waive that element. I'm all for figuring out a way of doing that. But be creative and use all the options possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol O'Keefe, Albany resident. I want to encourage you to pass this housing element, the resolution, the staff recommendation. I've gone to quite a few of the meetings that are listed here and have been very impressed with all of the work that has gone into preparing this and the genuine efforts by many volunteers and participants at the meeting to share what they thought and engaged in very constructive discussion about how this element can reflect what's most appropriate for Albany. So I do want to mention one very small thing, which I'm sorry to say I didn't notice until this afternoon reading through the element. It's a picky thing, and if it can be corrected, because apparently other things are going to be edited, that's great. If not, there will be another opportunity soon. But there's a reference on page 3-26 to the bulb being contained within the McLaughlin State Park. And, perhaps it's contained in the sense that it's in their plan. But if you look at the homepage for the McLaughlin East Shore State Park, on its front page it says, the City of Albany currently owns and operates the Albany Bulb, which is adjacent to, but outside of the East Shore State Park boundaries. East Shore State Park does not yet include the Albany Bulb. So the wording is just a little like it might be interpreted the wrong way, and if there is an opportunity to adjust that wording, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Clay Larson, Albany resident. Carol started the spirit of minutia here. I want to comment on one of the Exhibit A, which was is the proposed revisions to the HCD's comments. And on page 8, there's a description of Measure D, and in particular a description of the working group that the council created. And it characterizes the working group as follows. It says, recent formation of a working group tasked with developing a strategy by May 2014 for placing Measure D on the ballot. I would submit that's not quite what the council asked the working group to do. They asked for a pro-con analysis of the current parking requirements with perhaps a view that this would be changed through a ballot contest. But if that's what staff thinks this is, I think that's pretty clear. It's what it is. I did appreciate the characterization of Measure D, because it goes on to point out that it should be noted that Measure D may be a disincentive to very high density multifamily projects. It does not impede the city from achieving its default 20 unit per acre requirements, and it does not impede the city from achieving its regional housing needs assessments, RENA, in any way. So I appreciate that the city staff have developed a document here which accurately characterizes it. It also goes on to say, maybe this is more important, it says, in fact, the current parking requirements indirectly create an incentive for affordable housing, because in fact the Albany's requirements at 2 or 1.5 are higher than the parking ratios provided by the state density bonus law. So if we change that, if we change Measure D, we actually create a disincentive for affordable housing. So I appreciate the city, I believe, accurately characterizing the current role of Measure D and the impact of Measure D and the possible impact of changing Measure D. Thanks.
Thanks. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the issue?
Good evening, councilors. My name is Alexa Hauser. I'm an Albany resident. And first, I'd like to appreciate the fact that you have made updating the housing element a priority. It's disturbing to me that we've gone an entire cycle, almost two, without an updated housing element. And I'm very pleased to see the changes that have occurred as a result of the state's feedback, moving from consider something into doing something. Examples include language about adopting incentives, amending the second unit regulations, which others have spoken to, fee reduction program for affordable housing unit, and the Measure D task force. So we've taken a good step, and I understand why these steps are doable within this year. And I think as we begin to work on the next housing element, there will be the opportunity to do more work. And I hope that you and the Planning and Zoning Commission are fully in support of doing everything we can to make housing available for low and very low income people, knowing that the city is not going to build the houses themselves or the apartments, but everything that we can do. And there is a large group in the community willing to support this effort in many ways. On page 6 of the staff report, it talks about other ideas that were raised by the commission and indeed the community that will require further discussion and environmental review as part of the next housing element. And it says may be considered, and I hope that all of these things will be considered. They may not be adopted, but I hope they will be considered, as well as other ideas brought forth by the commission and the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the issue? Seeing no one, we will close the public hearing and bring it back to council. Council.
I would like to make a motion that we follow the staff recommendation that the City Council, number 1, conduct a public hearing on the mitigated negative declaration and on the adoption of the 2007 to 2014 housing element. Number 2, adopt as revised Resolution 2014-18, adopting the initial study, mitigated negative declaration, and the mitigation monitoring and reporting program for the 2007-2014 housing element. 3, adopt Resolution 2014-19, amending the Albany General Plan to incorporate the 2007-2014 housing element. Number 4, authorize staff to submit the 2007-2014 housing element to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for review.
And could we just take off the first one, because we did just do the hearing. We conducted the hearing, so could we just, okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. It has been moved by Vice Mayor Weil and seconded by Councilmember Moss that we adopt as revised Resolution 2014-18, adopting the initial study, mitigated negative declaration, and the mitigation monitoring and reporting program for the 2007-2014 housing element. Adopt Resolution 2014-19, amending the Albany General Plan to incorporate the 2007 to 2014 housing element. And then we authorize staff to submit the 2007 to 2014 housing element to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for review. Is there further discussion by the council?
I'd just like staff, please, to address Carol O'Keefe and Clay Larson's concerns and whether or not we should try to incorporate any changes of language tonight.
I believe we can go ahead and make that clarification regarding the East Shore State Park on page 326. And regarding the intent, the council's direction on the establishment of the Measure D working group, we can also clarify that as well if you'd like us to do that.
Okay, so does
What's your
the,
recommendation? Would you like us to like you to do that?
Yes, we would like we should correct that so to accurately reflect the direction from the council and the Measure D working group, absolutely.
Just a point of clarification, the comment that Clay was referring to is not part of the adopted housing element. It was a letter that was sent to HCD, so we can do that. Just wanted to clarify that.
yeah.
So do we need
So
additional?
would the maker of the motion and the second agree to those?
Yeah, those,
incorporating?
I recommend that we follow those recommendations.
Okay, all right. So I will repeat it. So we will adopt, the motion is to adopt as revised Resolution 2014-18, adopting the initial study mitigated declaration and the mitigation monitoring and reporting program for 2007 to 14 housing element, adopt the Resolution 2014-19, amending the Albany General Plan to incorporate the 2007-2014 housing element, authorize staff to submit the document to the State Department and to make the the recommended changes. Okay, will you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson?
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Weil?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Aye, and the motion carries unanimously. Next item, please.
New business, 2014 review of the city's commission, committees, boards. Staff recommendation that the council adopt resolution number 2014-20, approving the following changes to the city's advisory bodies.
Staff, please.
1, Social and Economic Justice Commission, assign the Community and Human Services Manager as staff liaison. Continue meeting every other month unless more frequent meetings are needed for the press of business in accordance with resolution number 2010-63, and move from summary minutes to action minutes in line with practice of all other advisory bodies per resolution number 2010-63. Number 2, sunset the Waterfront Committee effective May 2014.
Okay.
Madam Mayor and Council, since 2010, Council has directed staff to review the city's commissions, committees, and boards, also known as the city's advisory bodies, every 2 years. Tonight's report is a result of that review. Recommended changes include modifications to the Social and Economic Justice Commission, as well as possibly sunsetting the Waterfront Committee. No other changes for the remaining advisory bodies are being recommended at this time. Changes to the Social and Economic Justice Commission, or SEJC, as we like to refer to it, include assigning the Community and Human Services Developer as, Human Services Manager as staff liaison. Since June of 2013, the city added a Human Services Division to help the city assess what social services may be needed, specifically concerning homeless individuals in Albany. The Community and Human Services Manager has been working with SEJC for the past few meetings and brings the information she has been gathering and analyzing for more than 2 years now regarding services for homeless individuals offered around the region. Secondly, staff recommends continuing SEJC meetings every other month per Resolution 2010-63. This recommendation came from the initial review by an outside consultant of all the city's advisory bodies in 2010. The current schedule seems to be working and is manageable from a staff time perspective. The new responsibilities for the Community and Human Services Manager are in addition to her current responsibilities, therefore meeting every other month helps keep the workload manageable. Lastly, staff recommends SEJC move from summary minutes to action minutes in line with the other practice of other advisory bodies per Resolution 2010-63. Since SEJC has begun meeting in the council chambers, their meetings are audio recorded and easily uploaded to the city's website, making action minutes more doable. This action minutes also help streamline staff time. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about SEJC.
Does anyone have a question about the recommendation? Okay, then we'll go on to the rest of it.
Thank you. Also before the council tonight is the discussion of and possible sunsetting of the Waterfront Committee. For purposes of more efficient and effective use of staff time, the recommendation is to do so would improve the workload of the Community Development Director, who is responsible for and is often required to provide information for a number of commissions and committees throughout the year. The idea of sunsetting the Waterfront Committee was first discussed in 2010 as part of the advisory body review that was completed by an outside consultant. The recommendation was again part of the 2012 advisory body review. 2 projects were cited from the analysis in 2012 for maintaining the Waterfront Committee as an advisory body: the Cove Project and the subcommittee for the Waterfront Committee working on the Homeless Task Force. Planning for the Cove Project has been completed. What remains is the installation of the amenities to be completed by the city's Public Works Department. The Homeless Task Force completed their work in May of 2013. Since that time, Council has given direction, set policies, and approved service contracts for assisting people transitioning off the bulb. Overseeing contracts for services as well as policies approved by Council are being carried out on an administrative level by City staff. Additionally, SEJC is the advisory body working on assessing social service needs in Albany per their approved work plan, which includes issues surrounding homelessness that the city may need to consider in the near future or in the long term. Additionally, in recent years, when the potential for changes for the waterfront have arisen, Council has used ad hoc groups rather than using Waterfront Committee. The most recent example was the formation of a 22-person task force to review the proposal for a second campus for the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. The Council retains the ability to form ad hoc groups in the future as issues and proposals arise. From time to time, the Waterfront Committee has also been the forum for discussion of the future Golden Gate Fields property. Given that Golden Gate Fields is private property, the Planning and Zoning Commission is the responsible entity to review of land use related issues. Similarly, issues related to sea level rise at the Albany waterfront fall under the purview of the Sustainability Committee as they relate to climate change policies and programs. The Sustainability Committee is an appropriate venue for discussion of adaptation related programs. Council approved at the February 18th, 2014 meeting staff's pursuance of a grant opportunity from the Coastal Conservancy to develop a transition and improvement plan for the waterfront that will allow the city to be one step closer to transitioning the Albany-owned property at the waterfront to the McLaughlin East Shore State Parks. The Conservancy will vote on awarding the grant at its May 2014 meeting. Should Albany receive the grant, the public process for gathering community input is proposed to include community meetings, workshops, and/or ad hoc groups specifically focused on the development of the plan. The planning process will also be collaborative with East Bay Regional Park District, as well as other regional stakeholders such as CESP and the Bay Conservancy Development Commission, to name those who have already expressed support for the development of the plan. As projects, land improvements, potential development and protection and enhancement of the Albany's waterfront have arisen, Council has demonstrated its commitment for an extensive public process that ensures community input. With the sunsetting of the Waterfront Committee, Council's commitment to the waterfront can continue with ad hoc committees, working groups, and special assignments to existing commissions and committees. And with that, I'll answer your questions.
Are there questions from Council? No questions. Okay, then anyone who would like to speak to this issue, if you would come to the podium, please.
Amber?
Brian Johns, a member of the Waterfront Committee. I wanted to first say that I appreciate anytime the council wants to consider how to make government work better. So I want to proceed my comments with that. And really my primary concern is not the asking or the examination of this question as much as it is how it's being done. It seems to me that this is a little rushed. The committee itself was informed rather late that this question and this examination was being undertaken. So I don't feel as if the community itself has been given enough opportunity to discuss and debate whether the committee has naturally run its course. I understand that part of staff's responsibility is to save money and harness resources, and we all understand that Jeff works very hard, and we want him to remain healthy. On the other hand, my experience has been that when a volunteer citizen group comes to the council likes to be given both sides of the argument, both costs and benefits. I don't see staff offering costs and benefits to this particular proposal. So what I would like to know is, other than Jeff's time, does public participation of this sort, is it costing the city something that the citizens and residents should be aware of, or is it simply a time issue? If you're asking us as citizens to say, look, be aware of how much democracy costs, I think, great, tell us how much it costs. Staff time, it costs this much. Hours, in recording, it costs this much. I think that's perfectly reasonable. But to bring this question up under the guise of efficiency, I think begs a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Francesco Papalia, member of the Waterfront Committee. There's a principle of good government that fosters confidence and trust, and that's transparency of process and a free and unfettered open public dialogue of informed citizenry. There is a right way and a wrong way to address terminating the Waterfront Committee and reassigning all of its goals to other forums, particularly a committee that has been advising the council for 40 years. This could and should have been presented at the last Waterfront Committee on February 5th. At the same time, the committee was working to develop a work plan. There could have been a full and open discussion regarding the merits of this idea. The pros and cons of the idea could then be openly and fully discussed in a public forum like Patch. Perhaps the Albany Journal reporter, who's here today, could have written an article on it, and you could have had a full 30 days of input from the citizens to help you make the best decision. I personally would have learned a lot from hearing and engaging in that kind of public debate. Maybe, just maybe, you could have learned something new too. At the end of our last Waterfront Committee, Jeff asked us to be ready to come and present and lobby for the adoption of our work plan while listening to the input and direction that you would give us. That's what we were ready to do. 2 weeks later, we were informed of this proposal to end the committee. And it's hard for me to describe how it felt about the timing of this announcement so soon after our meeting. And because of the Brown Act, we could not even discuss it amongst ourselves, further adding to our frustration. Now, during my 6 years on the committee, I can recall only one session that I missed, and that was when I was literally out of the country. Now, if I was just an employee of a corporation, I could imagine being treated this way. But we are volunteer citizens appointed by you to serve this city. And I believe we deserve better than this kind of process, this kind of treatment. In government as well as life, as you know, it's not just what you do, but how you do it. And isn't that what you teach at the Albany Civics Academy? Let's have a little more open debate about this, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person, please. Next person.
I have Brian Parker, Bill Dan, and Patricia Jones.
Hi, my name is Brian Parker. I've had the honor of serving as the past chair of the Waterfront Committee and serving on the body, 4 or 5 years. And was very involved and have been very involved in city waterfront policy making since I moved to Albany 12 years ago. I feel very strongly that it's time for the council to be more involved in completing the McLaughlin East Shore State Park. I think I've been very happy to see the initiatives and leadership being provided by the council on this. I think to a certain extent we've moved to a place where it's going to take the active involvement of the council with staff support, some of which right now supports the Waterfront Committee, probably more productively involved in supporting the council. We have some important conversations to have with East Bay Regional Park District, which I think really belong at the public body level. And will not be greatly aided by the deliberations at the Waterfront Committee. I watched the Waterfront Committee agendas, and I must say that over the past several years, I really haven't seen much of importance on the agendas. I also think the demeanor of the meetings and the way the public is treated at times has not always exhibited the best of Albany, especially over the last year. It's kind of been confrontational, I think, against what the council's been involved with in terms of some waterfront issues. It's sad that that's true, but I think it's been obvious to people who watch the body. There's also, I think the council, back in the day, it may have been that there was no other body that could exhibit leadership or be the place where these conversations take place. But the council has done a really good job over the last 4 or 5 years, I'd say, and things that immediately come to mind of ways that the council has engaged the public, which the Waterfront Committee, I think by its structure, really hasn't been able to, was the special committee that the council put together to advise on the UC plans, the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs competition, the committee that you formed, the big public meeting that the council and the city staff put together. And I think the work on the homeless issue on the waterfront has been another example of that. And I have all sorts of confidence that will continue. And I think things change over time. And it's not going to be, it was not intended that the Waterfront Committee would be a permanent body. That's why it's called a committee and maybe not a commission. And I don't think it should be seen as an insult to anybody's service, including my own, that it doesn't continue forever. I think everything has a time and its place, and I think the time right now is the council's time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill Dan, a long-term Albany resident, and I've served 8 years on the Waterfront Committee, and I'm co-chair of the Citizens for the Albany Shoreline, and I could say we generally support the notion of sunsetting the Waterfront Committee effective 2014 for a lot of the reasons that the staff report included and what Mr. Parker just had to say. I heard earlier this evening about some language change regarding the bulb moving into the state park. And I think it was very clear, let's not misunderstand that the bulb is going to become part, and it's always been planned to become part of the East Shore State Park. It's included in the general plan and the special waterfront plans, and not to repeat a lot of the things that have already.
Issue.
Yes. Paul Curry and Amber Whitson.
Okay. Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members and staff. Thank you for the organization that has worked for almost 30 years to protect and preserve our shoreline for public parks and open space has culminated in McLaughlin East Shore State Park. Seth has long been a supporter of Albany's Waterfront Committee. In fact, input on matters that impact our waterfront and the completion of McLaughlin East Shore State Park, which the bulb is. We understand staff time, thus reduce costs to the city, which is facing financial stress due to various initiatives. Or in May, there will still be factors impacting the waterfront, as well as the transitioning of the bulb force, such as when used state park. Seth does not believe that the citywide only Parks and Rec Committee be a place to insurance appropriate ad hoc committee.
Thank you.
And although I'm a member of Social and Economic Justice Commission, I am speaking for myself tonight. Social and Economic Justice thing happened, which we felt in both cases that there was simply significant reasons given. The task force was disbanded that made the decision for us and went behind our back. This is another one of these behind the back things, and I don't like this. I think that, whereas, Jeff really works hard to do what he has to do, tasks to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Well, if he's already is not a good move, and I just think that the waterfront, look what it's by the bay town, and we really have to stick with it, and we have to stick with the idea that we're going to protect the waterfront, and having a separate waterfront commission is the way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Clay Larson will probably understand it better than I do. I think the timing's strange. I think I would agree with Brian Parker that the committee has probably had a lull, but I think now and on the near horizon there are projects that like the Waterfront Committee, the transfer of the bulb. So far that's when it'll come up for air, and I think is evaluated and reviewed by the Waterfront Committee. Nobody's mentioned the Albany Beat Habitats project. Providing the lawsuits don't prevail, we're going to get some amenities at our beach, care of the East Bay Regional Park District. I think it's appropriate and shepherd that process. The burrowing owl nonsense. I mean, it's now 5 years are up. No burrowing owls. A lot of people predicted that. Response and plan to the age that we built out there. I think it's appropriate for the Waterfront Committee to weigh in on that. Finally, I characterize it as a volcanic process, the Golden Gate, that will the Waterfront Committee is appropriate. Each member designates a
Sitting behind that dais aren't going to listen to anything I say. Rather than disbanding them, you castrated them by reducing the frequency of their meetings to every other month. As well as, lacking the ability to delegate their supervision to Isabella Duke, you are proposing, even without people living, Duke is going to 70 inspection reports by the California Integrated Waste Management's local enforcement agency, as well as supervising the Senior Center and the Social and Economic Justice Commission and Human Services. I think that it would be wise for the council to not, as you did with the Homeless Task Force.
We did not actually on this issue tonight, but I was struck by the concerns about transparency. A study was done by an outside consultant. It sounds like almost 4 years ago, making some recommendations. It does seem like a number of controversies that have been going on with the waterfront disbanded, sunsetted in May. Which are kind of thrown up, which can represent the ideas of the moment. I know the members of the waterfront a lot of time, council members, to understand the services and human needs, but didn't know all the issues long-term on a committee are really positioned to provide you as council with advice. I simply wonder about, it's fine if you prefer certain committee that has been in place for 40 years that are going on, and Citizens for the East Shore Parks are not the only environmentalists. Just to preserve it without considering all the other environmental issues is.
My name is Gary Clapp, Commission, but I'm only speaking for myself tonight. Mayor and Council, my major point I'd like to make works, and oftentimes, all due respect, we ought to really take advantage of that and applaud the hard work that they do and make it easier for them in the sense of a more consolidated advisory body, or making the advisory bodies in a more consolidated nature. So I certainly support the consolidation of the committee. And I want to make the final point that this has been discussed for quite some time, and I've personally been aware of it for quite some time. I thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Rochelle Nason. I'm a member of the Waterfront Committee. And what I want to talk about tonight is looking forward. If there is not a Waterfront Committee, what will be the forum for public participation, and how will you mobilize volunteers to work for some of the things that so clearly need to be accomplished? And what I'd like to suggest is this, that a great problem for Albany for many years has been entities that need to be involved in decisions. Of the bulb to Parkland is going to be an immensely expensive endeavor, and so forth. We need people to come together with people from those other together, not doing the kinds of things the Waterfront Committee has focused on, furniture for the beach, things often typically done at staff level. What we will need going forward is a group of people to try to understand the alternatives before you in a way that are also alternatives that will have the endorsement and support of the Regional Park District, but also state agencies that will be involved. So what certain sense of sadness in seeing the water.
And, I think it would be worthwhile exploring that. And I don't know if that's a different committee or doing something else, or maybe tacking that on to Parks and Recs. But I think that sort of is what's in the future for the waterfront. The big bopper is always, as I think Clay said, the smoking volcano. If something was to come up with Golden Gate Fields, that's when we really will need a lot of people looking at what's going on. And I would presume that we would set up another task force, that would actually go beyond or help with planning and zoning issues and council issues. So I'm assured that that's the way that would result. So at this point, I think I can see sunsetting it. I'm wondering if, in the interest of transparency, which has come up several times, whether we might do well to put this off another month, so people on the committee don't feel quite as in shock. But I'd be open to hearing other ideas on council.
Yeah. My feeling, well, I sympathize, because even though this has been kicked around, there really hadn't been a decision on it. And as I'm looking at the staff has a list here of what you're looking for in committee body. And even though I think the Waterfront Committee has had some trouble meeting some of these guiding principles in how things have been going the last 6 months or a year, which you alluded to, it does feel very truncated in the sense of timing. So even though it seems like the best thing for the city, and I know we've talked about what it might mean for the staff, I do feel that the committee really deserves to have a little bit more time to think about it and see what they were coming up with. I can see it sunsetting, and I don't really have an idea of what the best date would be. I know in terms of the city, it might be better earlier than later, but I don't know. I'd be open to a little bit more time.
Well, I'd like to have us stick to our timetable. Two things. One is that I think it has too narrow a focus, and that because it is the waterfront and so many regional groups are involved, that I think the model is kind of like what we did around the UC, the proposal to UC, where we brought many, many different people together. And then thirdly, the last two appointees that I've had to the Waterfront Committee have resigned because of the contentious nature of the meetings. And that has not been able to be changed. And so I think that's another reason to sunset it.
Now, I'm inclined to agree with sunsetting. And I served on the Waterfront Committee many years ago. I think for efficiency, at this point in time, the duties of the waterfront can be handled by Parks and Rec, by planning and zoning, by sustainability, by basically the category of the issue. I think obviously the Waterfront Committee has done some great things. The beach project is certainly an example of that. But at this point, with the help of the other established commissions, a lot of what's being done, as people have alluded to, is council's own participation with the regional bodies. The Vice Mayor and I have met with East Bay Regional Parks representatives. Staff's also met with Coastal Conservancy. And we're moving forward with actions that are going to take council continuing involvement. So at this point, I think that we would be better served to move toward the sunsetting, which we talked about previously. This is something that council discussed earlier, and so I feel like that this is the time to do it, and that's where
I'd like to go ahead with a motion then.
Could you explain more of the process of what would happen if they're voted to sunset it? Where do they go from here for their committee?
In the staff recommendation, they have a meeting left in April, and then they would be sunsetted in May. That is the staff recommendation.
So the public can hear what would be the next step.
So I move that we follow the staff recommendation that the council adopt resolution 2014-20, approving the following changes to the city's advisory bodies. Number 1, Social and Economic Justice Commission, assign the Community and Human Services Manager as staff liaison, continue meeting every other month unless more frequent meetings are needed for the press of business in accordance with resolution number 2010-63, move from summary minutes to action minutes in line with the practice of all other advisory bodies per resolution number 2010-63, and number 2, sunset the Waterfront Committee effective May 2014.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
It has been moved by Vice Mayor Weil and seconded by Councilmember Barnes that council adopt resolution 2014-20 approving the following changes to the city's advisory bodies. Social and Economic Justice Commission, assign the Community and Human Services Manager as staff liaison. Continue meeting every other month unless more frequent meetings are needed for the press of business in accordance with Resolution Number 2010-63. Move from summary minutes to action minutes in line with the practice of all other advisory bodies per, Resolution 2010-63, and sunset the Waterfront Committee effective May 2014. Is there further discussion by the council? Will you please poll the council?
Councilmember Atkinson?
Aye.
Councilmember Barnes?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Weil?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Aye, and the motion carries unanimously. Next item, please.
Other business reports on meeting attended, announcement of events, and future agenda items.
I have one.
Is there any item? Okay.
Yeah. I want to announce that we're restarting the program Pause to Read at the Albany Library, and it'll be starting on March 20th from 4 to 5 p.m. in the Edith Stone Room. And people are invited to see children read to dogs and improve their reading scores.
Thank you. Other announcements?
There's an one.
About the meeting on Wednesday.
Okay. You want to read it?
The City Council has scheduled a special meeting in Council Chamber for March 5th, 2014 at 6:30 p.m. to conduct a public hearing on the UC Village mixed-use project at 1075, 1080, 1095 Monroe Street and 1100 San Pablo Avenue.
All right. Any others? If not, this meeting is adjourned.